Hey, how's it going, guys? It's Skylar with Top Cup Games, and I'm here with
Connor.
And what'd you do today?
I took the locals 4-0 with Kaido today.
Ooh. How are your matchups today?
They were pretty. The first one was pretty tight, honestly, but that's just how the mirror match goes. Kaido v Kaido, and neither of us saw our island, so it was a fair and balanced match. But the rest of the games were pretty solid as well. I went up against a kid in round 2. Green is pretty, Kaido is pretty favored in the kid, so it was a pretty nice game. And then the next round was Odin. Pretty surprised to see an Odin player around here, but same principle, green player. Purple kind of does well on the green. And then the final round was Zoro. Zoro is probably the hardest matchup for Kaido. Sweating the whole time, but luckily I was able to keep tempo a bit and make sure that I kept his resources down on the board, and then I was able to take the win in the end.
Nice, nice. All right, let's give the people what they want. I want to see what they're performing.
All right, so what we got so far is we got 4 of these 2-drop blockers, pretty standard, and 4 of these 2-drop blockers. Just trying to keep ourselves protected in the early game with our 8 small blockers.
Okay.
Nothing too crazy there.
Yeah.
And then once we get into more cards like these, we got 2 3-drop Jack from the starter deck. And the principle for that is to supplement any time in the early game where I don't see the islands. I can just drop Jack to sort of ramp myself a little bit and hopefully make it to the mid to late game a little bit better when I don't see the island.
Did you feel like 2 was enough, or did you want to see more?
It feels like mostly a tech card in the sense that 2 is probably appropriate. I don't think I'd want to see more of him. I want to see the island instead. So that's my principle when it comes to Jack. He's kind of just like a filler card. I won't feel bad not seeing him.
Okay.
Next up, we've got 2 Who's Who. This guy's pretty important, even though he doesn't have counter, which sort of hurts, but he's pretty important for getting rid of small blockers, but the most important use of him is to blow up in the red matchup the 3-drop Zoros, because 3-drop blow up a Zoro, that's pretty big in that matchup when I'm not favored. So I need all the resources that I can get in order to win that one.
Yeah.
Next up, we've got 4 Sasaki. Nothing much to say about him. He's just a 2K blocker. We want to keep ourselves healthy for the early game. Make sure we get to that late game, and the 2K blocker helps us with that.
2K counter.
2K counter, my mistake. Once again, we've got 4 ulti. Same exact principle as the Sasaki earlier. We want ourselves protected, so we've got 4 of her.
Okay.
And then last but not least, we've got 4 of the 5-drop X-Drakes to bring ourselves up to 12 2K counters total in the deck. I feel like that's a good ratio for Kaido. He wants to, always have those in hand to be protected. And 12 in the deck, I feel like is a pretty good ratio for 2K counters.
Did his effect come up at all today?
It can. In the late game, whenever I don't have much to play, and I've already got other resources out, sometimes it does come in clutch to play the X-Drake if I know that I'm going to be able to protect myself in other ways. That way I can disrupt my opponent and try to swing in for game.
All right.
Next up, we've got probably what I'd argue the best character card in the deck.
Yeah.
4 Queen starter deck.
Best blocker.
Definitely an insane blocker, an insane tempo play to keep your hand healthy. The Dom -1, draw 2, trash 1. A blocker on a 6K body is pretty relevant for most attacks whenever you see yourself getting swung in with 7. People like to put 2 Dawn on their leader, swing into your leader. You just block with the Queen, put a 2K counter in front of it. It completely nullifies the attack and keeps your Queen alive for next turn. It's a pretty huge play, and just keeps yourself healthy.
Yes.
Next up, this is a pretty arguable one. I've got 2 Babanukis.
Okay.
Somewhat of a filler card. I just feel like the 5-drop 7K beat stick is pretty reasonable in most matchups. The only thing I don't like seeing it into is green. Whenever they have the Okiku out, they can just swing in with Okiku and then just tap it down.
I mean, that is a pretty big vanilla, though.
But as vanillas go, I'm not sad to see a Babanuki. He also gets over Jet Pistol on its own, so a lot of times in the red matchup he'll stay alive, and I can just keep swinging in with him. So they kind of have to respect the 7K beat stick sometimes. Next up, we've got another classic. We've got 4 starter deck 6-drop kings. This card is an insane tempo card for blowing up blockers, blowing up Zoros, Okikus, any relevant threats in the early to mid game. He can just take care of them on his own, and then once again he's just a 7K beat stick that just keeps coming in later.
Yeah.
Nothing much to say about him other than that. And I've seen a lot of deck lists argue about the ratio of the 7-drop king. I personally like 1 7-drop king mainly because Dawn -2 is significant to pay the cost of, and you don't really often see a lot of 2 and 3-drop characters on the field that you're like, I need to take care of those right now. It's mainly just the 3 and up, but this can be effective at taking out a line of blockers, say for instance in the Law matchup. They'll always have low to the ground cost characters, and blowing up 2 of them with King is pretty significant to keep them away from their hero ability as long as you can. Next up we've got the big boys. We've got 3 9-drop Kaidos from the starter deck. This card it will probably win you the game by staying on the board the entire time once you play it. So you just blow up their threat, and what I like to do is just keep maintaining board control for the longest time that I can. So blowing up, say for instance in the red matchup, the 5-drop Luffy with Rush, that's a pretty big deal. I need to be able to blow that up with the character. So I drop the Kaido on them, and then I rush into one of their other characters that have attacked the previous turn. So it's a 2-for-1, and I maintain a 10K on board. They're not going to get rid of them.
Yeah, most of the time people just leave it on board because there's no point.
There's way too many resources you need to pump into a character or a leader in order to try to get over this Kaido. And speaking of course, we've got an even bigger Kaido, the 2 10K, or 2 10-drop Kaidos. This one, obviously, same principle as the 9-drop. Once you get them down on board, they're probably not going to want to sink the resources into trying to get rid of them. And if they do, it's pretty easy for you to just keep a card in hand to just get a counter off and keep them alive regardless. So, not much that really needs to be said about this card. He's obviously great in pretty much all scenarios, unless you're about to die. And speaking of obvious includes, we've got 4 Onigashima Islands.
Yep, self-explanatory.
Probably, I know I said Queen was the best character card, but this is probably the best card, period, in the deck. Not much needs to be said. Once they see that in the opening hands, you keep it, snap keep, and your opponent's going to have a hard time.
Yeah.
Now we're moving on to the event cards. I'll go ahead and move this aside. I've got 2 Thunder Bagua. I've realized whenever you play Kaido, you're kind of starved on resources when it comes to keeping your Dawn open after you're playing your big cards. So keeping 2 open is sometimes difficult to accomplish. But whenever you do manage to do it, making sure that you have this to protect yourself with 4,000 counter. And in the late game, that ramp can be relevant once because you've been minus dawning the entire time. So making sure that you play the Thunder Bagua plus 4,000, get that extra Dawn. Maybe your next turn is probably going to be a 9-drop or a 10-drop Kaido. So it really sets you up while protecting you. 2-drop or 2 cost is just sort of steep. So that's why I like Blast Breath much better. It's almost the exact same card, except you have to Dawn -1 when you play it, but 1 drop for 4,000 is overrate for protection. Not too much needs to be said. You'll want to see this whenever you're in the late game trying to protect your characters or your Kaido from dying, especially in the red matchup. I keep reiterating that, but red is the hardest matchup, and you definitely want to see that late game. And also in the mirror, whenever you're getting swung in by a big Kaido, Blast Breath might just save you the game.
Yeah, heard it's a pretty good card. All right, any shout-outs?
Shout out to the local Game On community. Everyone here is pretty awesome. It's nice to have a healthy competitive spirit in the game shop every week, and so it's nice to come in, have friendly games while also sweating a little bit. So it's all good.
Thanks for the deck profile, man. Thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Peace.